A quiet Manhattan night shatters when a single phone call pulls Archie Goodwin straight into a stabbing, a killer, and a fashion house full of secrets. Step inside, the danger is only getting started. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the day Archie got stabbed. If you've never tried standing up while the sidewalk is insisting you take a personal interest in its texture, I recommend skipping the experience. The first thing I registered was cold concrete under my palms and the unpleasant awareness that my shirt was leaking in a place no shirt should leak. The second thing was dawn, thin, pale and nosy, spilling down Madison Avenue like it had arrived early just to laugh at me. The third thing was pain, sharp enough to sing harmony. I got one knee under me and took stock. My head was working, my legs were holding, and my wallet was still in the right pocket, which meant this wasn't a mugging. The wound in my side was warm in a way that suggested ambition. Whoever had jabbed me had done it neatly and fast, which I'd ordinarily admire if I weren't the exhibit. A flicker of motion caught my eye. A woman, tall, a silk scarf whipping behind her like a flag of retreat, turning a corner half a block away. I couldn't swear to her face, but the scarf was a pale shimmer, expensive enough to buy my weekly laundry. She vanished into the soft blur of morning traffic, leaving me with a souvenir I didn't remember requesting. I didn't have the luxury of chasing her. Even I know my limits when vital organs are issuing complaints. So I staggered toward the glowing red sign of a drugstore that was either open or blessedly hallucinated. To my luck, it was open. The clerk looked at me like I'd asked him to donate a kidney, but he fetched a first aid kit. I did the bandaging myself. He didn't have the hand-eye coordination required to tackle a Boy Scout knot, let alone a stab wound. Once my side was trussed up like a Christmas roast, I found a payphone and dialed the brownstone. The line clicked once. Nero Wolfe speaking. His voice hit me colder than the early morning breeze. Wolfe at dawn is not a tender prospect on an ordinary day. Wolfe at dawn, hearing his assistant bleeding onto public pavement, is a glacial experience. "It's me," I said. "Someone poked a hole in me. I'm patching it." Silence. Not the polite kind. This was the kind Wolfe used when rearranging his vocabulary to avoid unseemly language. "Archie." His tone was flat enough to press flowers. "Your location?" "A drugstore near 76th. I'll be home shortly if I don't leak out on the way." "Confound it. Return. At once." That was Wolfe's version of panic. I'd once seen him stay calm while a murderer held a gun on us, but the idea of me bleeding unsupervised apparently offended every principle he possessed. I hung up, bought a ginger ale to prove I still had living impulses, and hailed the first taxi whose driver didn't recoil at the sight of me. The ride was bumpy enough to make the wound register every pothole as a personal betrayal. Still, West 35th Street arrived, and I climbed out feeling like I had one more good hour left in me before gravity filed a complaint. Fritz opened the office door before I had the knob fully turned. He didn't speak. He rarely wasted words, but his eyes took in the situation, and his hand closed around my elbow with just enough pressure to keep me vertical without violating Wolfe's rule about legwork. We crossed the threshold like an injured soldier and his silent guardian. Wolfe was behind his desk, his bulk arranged in the throne-like chair he favoured for scolding humanity. When he saw me, his lips compressed to a thin, horizontal line that suggested murder, not of my assailant, but of me for getting stabbed without permission. "Sit," he commanded. "I'm still portable," I said as I lowered myself to the red leather chair. "No need to call the undertaker." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered, which was practically an embrace. He gestured curtly. "Remove your coat." I did, wincing more than I intended. Wolfe's gaze dropped to the tear in the fabric. His eyebrows made a small, angry ascent. "The blade went in here." "That's correct. My side confirms the trajectory." "Idiot." "I'll embroider that on a pillow." Before Wolfe could escalate the pleasantries, the bell rang at 7:10 a.m. Fritz moved to answer it. This was allowed, since we both knew Wolfe would sooner walk into Times Square naked than approach the front door. Inspector Kramer entered with the air of a man who had already had one too many surprises for the morning. His cigar was clamped between his teeth, unlit, which meant he had either forgotten to light it or wasn't ready to confess how worried he was. Behind him lumbered Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, who regarded me with the suspicion of a bulldog evaluating a wounded postman. Kramer stopped dead when he saw me. "Goodwin," he said. "You look like a floor sample." "Thanks. I've been meaning to ask if you do interior decorating." Cut the wisecracks, but his tone lacked heat. "You got stabbed?" "Yes," Wolfe answered before I could. "He was assaulted. This is now a police matter, Mr. Kramer. I expect diligence." Kramer's eyes flicked to Wolfe, then to the bloodstain on my shirt, then back to Wolfe. "Don't tell me how to run my job." Wolfe leaned back an inch, which for him was equivalent to throwing his arms in the air. "I shall tell you whatever is necessary to prevent further incompetence." "We're not doing this," Kramer grunted. "Goodwin, what happened?" I gave him the story in neat Gertrude Stein paragraphs. The dawn sidewalk, the stabbed surprise, the scarfed woman making her getaway like a runway model in a hurry, and the drugstore bandaging that wasn't about to win awards. Kramer chewed on his cigar. "Did you see her face?" "No. She moved like she had an appointment with a camera flash." "Any scent? Distinguishing marks?" "Perfume," I said. "Iris root. The good stuff. If it costs less than $20 an ounce, I'll eat Pearlie's hat." Pearlie grunted something about my dietary habits. "And this," I added, fishing into the folds of my coat. I produced a tiny scrap of pale blue fabric stuck to my button. It was clinging to me like your last murder warrant. Wolfe extended a hand, and I placed the scrap on his blotter. He didn't touch it. He simply studied the weave as if it had personally offended him. "Diagonal thread," Wolfe said. "Unusual. Not common retail cloth." "It looks like part of a scarf," I added. Kramer took out a small envelope and nudged it toward me. "Drop it in." I did. Evidence protocol satisfied. "Any idea why someone would want to make you into Swiss cheese?" Kramer asked. "If I knew, I'd send you a greeting card." "That's enough," Wolfe said, his voice rising just half a degree. "His wound must be attended. You may interview him later." Kramer eyed Wolfe. "I'm not leaving until I understand what happened." "You will leave," Wolfe replied, "because you require your faculties to do your work, and this is not the moment for obstinacy." Pearlie stiffened at the tone, but Kramer surprised all of us by stepping back a pace. He wasn't surrendering, he was making a tactical withdrawal. "All right, Wolfe," he said quietly. "I'll wait for your report." That was as close to a handshake as they'd ever get. Kramer turned to me. "Goodwin, stay put. If you think of anything, even a smell, call me." "I'll keep a notepad on my nose." He snorted and left the office with Pearlie trailing after him like a resentful cloud. As the door shut, Wolfe shifted his gaze back to me. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "You will not leave this house today." "Sure, I'll just cancel the ballet tickets." "Spare me." Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, his posture diffident but his eyes sharp. "Breakfast?" "No," Wolfe snapped. "He's injured." "Breakfast won't kill me," I protested. "Whatever stabbed me already tried that." Fritz inclined his head and vanished to fetch something restorative, which in Fritz's universe meant eggs cooked so perfectly they could resurrect the dead. Wolfe sighed heavily, a sound like a bored volcano. "Your capacity for trouble is unparalleled." "Thank you." That was not a compliment. "It rarely is." Wolfe drummed his fingers once on the arm of his chair. "You said iris root perfume and silk." His gaze narrowed. "This suggests one of the couture houses." "Maybe." She moved like she was late for a fitting. "Confound it," he muttered. "This is intolerable." I leaned back, ignoring the pain. "Don't worry. If she tries again, I'll request she aim for the left. I'm right-handed." "Archie!" His voice cracked like a whip, not in anger, but in that rare moment when the facade slipped just enough to show concern underneath. It wasn't something he'd ever admit to, but it was there, threaded through the syllables. I grinned. "Easy. I'm not checking out yet. Someone wants something, and I'd like to know what before they sharpen another knitting needle." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "Very well. You will rest. You will not leave the premises, and you will furnish a full, precise account once your meal is in you. Fritz!" Fritz reappeared with a tray, moving with the solemn dignity of a man delivering communion. As he set it down, Wolfe reached for the bell cord. "I shall attend to my orchids. We will continue this at 11. He rose, slowly but with purpose, and headed for the elevator, leaving me with a fresh breakfast, a throbbing wound, and one pale scrap of fabric that felt like a starter pistol for trouble. I watched the elevator doors glint shut and muttered, "Fine, let's see what the fashion world has stitched up for me." The day had only started bleeding, and so had I. By the time noon sidled up to the brownstone, I had eased myself into my office chair with all the dignity of a man trying to convince gravity he still had a working agreement with it. The wound in my side was behaving like a small, angry tenant who objected to my lease, but the chair was where I belonged. If a national monument had upholstery, it would have felt as noble. I adjusted my tie, kicked the wastebasket an inch to the left, precision matters, and tried pretending I wasn't a patched-up pincushion. Wolfe, enthroned behind his desk, pretended not to watch me. That pretense was about as subtle as a brass band. He had his book open but hadn't turned a page in 5 minutes. When I finally shifted position with an involuntary grunt, he expelled a breath that could have flattened a lighter man. "You should be in bed," he intoned. "And miss the parade?" I said. "Never." It was not an invitation to jest. With you, it rarely is. Before he could escalate the debate into a full lecture on idiocy, the doorbell rang. At 12:04 p.m., Fritz passed the office threshold with his usual silent glide announcement, "A lady to see Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Her name?" "She gave none, sir. She appears distressed." "Distress," Wolfe muttered, "is rarely convenient." Then louder, "Show her." Fritz vanished, and a moment later the office admitted a tall woman in a dove-grey coat with lapels sharp enough to slice deli meat. She carried tension the way some women carried perfume, noticeably and without apology. Her gloves were pearl-coloured, her hair perfectly arranged in sleek dark waves, and her expression hovered somewhere between poise and panic. "Miss Valette?" Wolfe said, not asking. She blinked. Yes, Regina Valette. How did you—" "You are wearing Bois d'Iris perfume," Wolfe said, "a particularly fine formulation, though wasted on agitation. And the weave of your lapel is consistent with Maison Valette's premier line. That, and other matters, suggested your arrival." She stared at him, then at me, then back at him. If she'd been looking for comfort, she had come to the wrong house. But if she wanted accuracy, Wolfe's brownstone was the nearest church to truth. "Please," she said faintly, "may I sit?" Wolfe gestured at the red leather chair across from him. She sat with the stiff posture of someone who feared collapsing would be taken as weakness. I respected that. I'd taken similar measures earlier. "I understand," Wolfe said, "that your visit pertains to a recent disturbance." She winced. "Disturbance is gentle. My business is in chaos. And this morning I received a message, one I cannot ignore." Wolfe did not bother encouraging her. The weight of his silence performed the task. She exhaled and began. "My sister," she said, "Lydia Valette. She was once partner, designer, and equal. But 2 years ago we disagreed over direction. It became untenable. She left. Since then, Maison Valette has had sabotage, sketches stolen, models lured away, rumours planted, and 3 months ago letters began arriving. Threats, coded into the hems of expensive fabric swatches, words sewn with dark thread." I lifted an eyebrow. "Threats sewn? That's a new one." Her eyes flicked to me. "It's symbolic. Fashion is a language. Whoever is doing this knows it well." Wolfe tapped the edge of his blotter. "This latest message?" She swallowed. "It said, 'The cut must be made,' last night. Delivered by courier, no signature." "Meaning?" Wolfe asked. Her voice cracked. I don't know." "And the assault on Mr. Goodwin?" Wolfe asked. Her face drained several shades. "What assault?" she whispered. I leaned forward. "Someone stuck a blade in me this morning. Your perfume was the scent she left behind." "No," she breathed. "Mr. Goodwin, I swear on everything, I had no knowledge of any violence." "As she swears," Wolfe murmured, "but she omits what she fears." Her fingers twisted the clasp of her purse. "You must believe me." "I believe facts," Wolfe said, "not pleas." I took over. "Tell us about Lydia." Regina hesitated. Brilliant. Difficult. Her designs were visionary. Too visionary for our investors. She felt constrained. I felt responsible. It became a war, but I never thought she'd try to destroy us. "You assume it is Lydia?" Wolfe asked. I don't know who else would hate us enough to do this. Red herring, I muttered. We love those. Wolfe shot me a look. Archie, contain your levity. Why? It's one of my better features. I saw a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, almost affection. Regina didn't notice. She was too busy rearranging her fears into sentences. We've lost 3 major clients, she continued. We're approaching Fashion Week. If this keeps up, Maison Valette will collapse. So, you come to me, begging rescue. Wolfe laced his fingers. Yet you hide things. I'm not. You are, Wolfe said. Your voice quavers when you mention Lydia, but steadies when discussing sabotage. Therefore the threat is personal, possibly intimate. Unburden yourself, or we will conclude prematurely. I can't, she whispered. Then we cannot proceed. Her head jerked upward. No, please, I'll try. But it's complicated. Wolfe's eyes hardened. I tolerate complexity. I do not tolerate deception. If you engage my services under false premises, I shall end our association, retain the fee, and leave you to ruin. She shivered. I won't deceive you. We might have squeezed something meaningful from her then, but the phone rang at 12:27 p.m. Wolfe glared at it as though the instrument had committed treason. I answered. Brownstone, Goodwin speaking. Kramer's gravel came down the line. Goodwin, put Wolfe on. He's occupied. Put him on anyway. I covered the receiver. It's Kramer. He sounds like the morning kicked him. It likely did, Wolfe said. Give me the phone. I handed it over. Wolfe held it like an execution notice. Wolfe. Pause. I see, Wolfe said. His eyelids lowered. When? Pause. Were there witnesses? Pause. Very well. Thank you. He hung up with exaggerated precision. Claude Winfield is dead, Wolfe said. Regina gasped. Winfield? The critic? The unpleasant one, I clarified, had a vocabulary like a scalpel. He was found an hour ago, Wolfe said. Stabbed. The wound corresponds to Mr. Goodwin's. Same blade? I asked. Kramer believes so. Regina clutched the armrests. This is impossible. On the contrary, Wolfe said, it is increasingly probable that the attacker wished to silence someone. Perhaps he mistook Mr. Goodwin for another man in dim light. Or perhaps Mr. Winfield was not the intended first victim. I've never met him, Regina whispered. He wrote about us, yes, but he was cruel to everyone, I shrugged. Equal opportunity venom. The question, Wolfe said, is why he was killed now. She shook her head helplessly. Wolfe leaned forward, monumental and unyielding. Mrs. Valette, let us be clear. A murder has been committed, a second attempted. Threats have escalated to violence. If you desire my assistance, you must commit without reservation. I do, she said. I'll tell you anything. Then your retainer, Wolfe said. $20,000. Her eyes widened. 20. Your firm is collapsing, Wolfe said. Your competitor is savage, and someone is killing critics. That is my fee. Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse. She drew out a checkbook with the Maison Valette logo embossed in gold. I watched her pen shake as she wrote. When she tore the check free, it fluttered like a wounded bird. She handed it to him. Wolfe inspected it, nodded once, and placed it in his safe. You may proceed. She exhaled in a long, quivering stream. Thank you. I said, now that the business portion is handled, let's get to work before the murderer decides to finish his sewing project. Phooey, Wolfe said. I grinned, just trying to lighten the mood. It requires no such treatment. Tell that to my side. Wolfe frowned deeply. Archie, rest. You are not to leave this house today. That order again? You're repeating yourself. I will repeat it until you obey it. Regina watched us with troubled fascination, like seeing a mountain trying to scold its own echo. We will begin, Wolfe said, with a full account of your firm's structure, personnel, finances, and feuds. Regina nodded weakly. Of course. Before she could speak, Fritz appeared in the doorway with the solemnity of a Swiss clock announcing an unscheduled hour. Lunch. Ah. Wolfe rose with regal reluctance. Mrs. Valette, you will remain. Mr. Goodwin, escort her to the dining room, but do not engage in exertion. When do I ever? I said. Wolfe gave me a look that suggested a written list could be produced. I stood, slowly, and gestured Regina toward the hall. As she followed, visibly shaken, I thought ahead. Couture houses, stolen sketches, cryptic stitches, a dead critic, and a blade that seemed to have my name on it. Whoever was cutting patterns in this mess wasn't finished, and I had the feeling I was next on the fabric. The afternoon sun had no right to be as cheerful as it was by the time I limped into Maison Valette's lobby, but New York weather has always enjoyed mocking the wounded. The place smelled of starch, perfume, ambition, and the faint electrical hum of a fashion empire trying not to unravel. I squared my shoulders, gently, given the stab souvenir tucked under my ribs, and told the receptionist that I wanted the grand tour. She looked me over the way a seamstress eyes a badly basted hem and decided I wasn't worth the trouble of denial. The elevator opened on the main atelier floor with a sigh of reluctant machinery. What spilled out at me was a parade of silk bolts stacked like Technicolor staircases, mannequins standing at stiff attention as if waiting for judgment, and a crew of seamstresses whose eyes followed me, like I'd wandered into the ladies' restroom by mistake. Steam from pressing irons curled lazily through the air, gathering in corners, and a scratchy trumpet solo wandered out from a radio perched somewhere behind a sewing machine. The atmosphere was noir chic, equal parts cigarette haze and nervous perspiration. I paused by a rack of finished garments, a forest of gowns shimmering in metallic fabrics that probably had price tags steep enough to fund my monthly shoe polish. As I admired, or pretended to, someone approached with the self-assurance of a commander on parade. She was tall, whip-thin, and wore a charcoal suit tailored with such mathematical precision that I wondered if she slept with a protractor. Her face was sharp, her cheekbones carrying enough altitude to require clearance. Her eyes were cool, assessing, and promised exactly zero charity. "I am Lydia Valette," she said. "My sister tells me you're meddling." "My reputation precedes me," I said. "Good thing it walks faster." Her lips twitched. Not amusement exactly, more like a cat deciding not to bite. "I suppose Regina hired you to poke around." "She hired Mr. Wolfe," I corrected. "I'm the backup orchestra." "I prefer my orchestras silent." She gestured around the room. "Observe quickly. We're in the middle of preparing our next line." "Looks busy," I noted, "though one of your mannequins seems to have lost an argument." She stiffened. "What?" I pointed to a mannequin standing near a rolling rack. It was missing its right arm, which lay on the floor like a discarded alibi. The break wasn't clean. Splintered wood and twisted metal showed someone had applied an encouraging amount of force. Lydia's jaw tightened. "That was an accident last night. Paul dropped it." "Which one is Paul?" I asked. She pointed with the irritation of someone who would prefer her underlings to be invisible. "Paul Anders, a skinny kid with blonde bangs and nerves vibrating like radio static, sat hunched over a cutting table, slicing fabric with the solemnity of a surgeon who'd attended medical school through correspondence courses. I drifted his way. "Paul Anders?" He jumped. Actually jumped. Yes?" "Relax," I said. "I don't bite unless provoked, and even then it's usually verbal." He laughed nervously. "Sorry, busy day." "I can see that. Break any good mannequins lately?" His scissors froze mid-cut. That was an accident." "Sure," I said. "Accidents happen. Some just leave more splinters than others." Before he could panic himself into confession, a new voice swooped in, smooth, polished, and eager to charm its way out of trouble. "Mr. Goodwin, is it?" said a man emerging from the office door. "Mason Clark, business manager." He looked like a walking advertisement for well-applied hair pomade and subtle tailoring. His suit was navy, with pinstripes that whispered rather than shouted. He moved with the confident glide of someone used to stepping between disasters and potential investors. His smile could have sold life insurance to a ghost. "Welcome," he said warmly. "My apologies for our current state." "It's all right," I said. "I like seeing an empire before the scaffolding goes up." He chuckled. "We're not collapsing, I assure you." "That's a relief," I said. "Your receptionist looked like she was bracing for a fire drill." He leaned in slightly. "Off the record, the last few months have been challenging, but we will recover." "Provided no more mannequins lose limbs," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Never mind. Occupational hazards." I shifted and felt my side protest. "Tell me something, Mr. Clark. How well did you know Claude Winfield?" His face froze in a polite rictus. "The critic, only professionally. He came here occasionally to preview upcoming lines." "Was he here recently?" Mason hesitated. "Yesterday, briefly." "That's funny," I said. "You hesitated like you were trying to decide whether to admit he stayed or whether he argued with someone." He exhaled. "All right. He came to speak with Lydia. They had a disagreement, but that's hardly unusual for Winfield." Lydia's voice swept in like a steel breeze. "Winfield came to provoke us, as usual. He wanted an exclusive preview on a design Regina rejected. When I declined, he insulted our entire spring line. I escorted him out." "Did he threaten you?" I asked. "No," she said crisply. "But he didn't need to. He threatened with his pen." "Sharpest instrument in the industry," I agreed. A scent drifted past me, something that started floral and ended catastrophic. I turned to find Eloise Trent, an aging model whose face still carried the ghost of former glamour, drifting toward us. Her dress clung to her in ways that might have been alluring 20 years ago, but now looked like optimism stitched into silk. She smelled of too much perfume, not iris root, but something louder and considerably less refined. "Mr. Goodwin, isn't it?" she purred. "I heard we had a visitor." "I try to brighten rooms," I said. "Sometimes I even succeed." She laughed, tossing her hair. "Have you come to investigate? Everyone's so terribly anxious." "Are you anxious, Miss Trent?" "Should I be?" She gave an artful little pout. "I'm harmless." "Depends what you weigh down your handbag with." She laughed again, but her eyes glittered with something sharp and calculating. "Your perfume," I said lightly. "It's less iris root, more riot root." Lydia snorted. Mason coughed. Eloise gave me a slow, predatory smile. "You're amusing, Mr. Goodwin." "I try. It keeps my bills paid." She drifted away, leaving behind a fog that might have violated city ordinance. I moved through the atelier, making mental notes. Who watched me too closely? Who looked away too fast? Who flinched when mannequins were mentioned? Suspicion here was currency, and business was booming. In a corner near the ironing stations, a small bin of fabric scraps caught my eye. Nestled among them was a piece of pale blue cloth, a swatch with the same diagonal weave as the scrap found on my coat that morning. Exclusive top-line fabric, Regina had said. Not sold to customers, not used for lesser garments. I picked it up using 2 fingers and held it up. "This yours?" I asked Paul. He nodded. "Yes, Lydia's designs use that. It's one of our signature weaves." "Who has access?" "All of us, but only Lydia approves its use." "Meaning it's locked?" "Not locked, but monitored." "Ah," I said, "monitored. My favourite vague verb." He looked like he wanted to crawl into his cutting table and hide. I pocketed the swatch temporarily, then deposited it in a glass envelope Paul offered. Evidence is evidence. Kramer would have my hide if I mishandled it twice in one day. I continued the tour, mapping personalities. Mason smiled too much. Lydia glared too hard. Eloise floated like a ghost with overdue bills. Paul trembled like an understudy afraid of the spotlight. If fashion was warfare, these people were armed to the teeth with scissors and resentment. As I turned to leave, Lydia called out, "Mr. Goodwin." I paused. "There's something else," she said, lowering her voice. "Claude Winfield wasn't just here yesterday. He asked about Regina." "In what way?" "He said he'd been given information, damning information, about the origins of our house." "That's vague." "He was a critic," she said. "Vague was his medium." I pocketed the comment. It would need Wolfe sorting. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my side felt like someone had installed a small, angry furnace. I stepped into the office with the grace of a man balancing on the edge of a knife. Wolfe looked up. His expression tightened. "Archie, you have been exerting yourself." "Only physically," I said. "Mentally, I'm still in bed." "Phooey." He eyed the envelope in my hand. "Evidence?" I placed it on his desk. Diagonal thread fabric swatch. Same type as the one stuck to my coat. "Exclusive to Maison Valette," he grunted. "Predictable." "And the cast of characters," I said, taking a seat. "One icy designer sister, one slick business manager, one aging model in hock to half of Manhattan, And one pattern maker who jumps at shadows. He nodded. Your observational precision is satisfactory. That from Wolfe was equivalent to receiving a meritorious medal. Anything else? He asked. Plenty, but it'll require charts. Wolfe sighed, reached for the bell cord and murmured, Bring beer. Fritz appeared moments later with the chilled glass. Ritual closure achieved. The needlework of this case had only begun, and Wolfe was already threading the first stitch. I've seen Wolfe think before, usually with the enthusiasm of a man choosing which appetizer to condemn, but never with the architectural intensity he brought to the case that afternoon. Lunch still sat warm in my stomach, the orchids were perfuming the whole downstairs like a millionaire's greenhouse, and the brownstone had achieved that peculiar hush that always warned me a storm was brewing, whether meteorological or Wolfian. This time it turned out to be both. I was at my desk trying to type up notes without wincing too visibly every time my wounded side complained, but Wolfe kept glancing at me, as if I'd been foolish enough to bleed on one of his imported rugs. Archie, he said finally, snapping a book shut, you are grimacing. I call it smiling, I said. It adds charm. Confounded Archie. His tone cracked harder than my rib felt. It was the first sign he cared I might be less indestructible than usual. Drink something restorative. If it's gin, it is milk. I grimaced harder. But he was right. My body needed peace offerings. I fetched a glass from Fritz, who materialized like an offended angel in the doorway, set the cold bottle on a tray and retreated back to the kitchen without commentary. I took a reluctant swallow. Milk mention number 1 officially on the record. Wolfe gestured imperiously. Bring the evidence. I collected the spread from the safe, the embroidered threat letters, the torn blue scrap, the drafts of Claude Winfield's last reviews, and Regina Vallette's financial documents. Each item was as pleasant as a snake in a shoebox, but Wolfe laid them out carefully, like stones forming a ceremonial path. His eyes moved across them, slow and deep, as if translating a language only he spoke. The thread, he murmured, picking up the fabric swatches, is too deliberate. Whoever stitched these messages understands both couture practice and symbolic warfare. Fashion as a blood sport, I said. I always suspected shoulder pads hid armor plating. Archie. That was a reprimand. Observe the thread count. I leaned in. To me it looked like thread. Maybe fancier thread, but still thread. Count the long and short stitches, Wolfe insisted. I did. Looks uneven. Not uneven. Encoded. Oh, good, I said. Mystery needlework. All we need now is a loom. He ignored me and pulled a magnifier closer. With a speed surprising for a man who believed haste was a sin, he scribbled notations on a pad. The pattern repeats every 12 stitches, a series of initials. Initials of what? We will determine that once Mr. Pantzer arrives. As if summoned by competence, the bell rang at 2:41 p.m. I went to get it because Fritz had a stew on, and Wolfe would sooner eat a salad than answer the door. Saul Pantzer entered with his usual shrugging understatement, flat cap in hand, coat collar turned up against threatening weather, expression polite but unreadable. Saul, I said, your timing is immaculate as always. I try, he said, stepping inside with the calm of a man who rarely needed to rush. What's the trouble, Wolfe? Wolfe pointed at the swatches. Threat messages. Someone has stitched coded initials into the threads. Saul arched an eyebrow. Cute. Not cute, Wolfe retorted. Murderous. I filled him in on the Claude Winfield stabbing, my own near-fatal run-in, and the delightful circus that was Maison Valette. Saul listened without interrupting, his eyes half-lidded in focus. You want me to start digging, he said finally. Into the models, Wolfe confirmed. Their finances, habits, resentments and movements yesterday. Also into Mr. Winfield's last appointments. Saul nodded once. I'll get on it. That's why we pay you the big money, I said. Saul gave the barest ghost of a grin and left. That left Wolfe, myself, the storm outside, and the quiet hum of orchids perfuming the air. It was around 3:20 by then, and thunder grumbled over Manhattan like a spoiled critic displeased with his lunch. Lightning flickered, casting the office in stark slices of shadow and white. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips together. These initials, he said slowly, may be an attempt to implicate Lydia Valette. Seems too obvious, I said. She's got motive, but she feels like a decoy. Possibly. Wolfe tapped the fabric. I note the diagonal weave. Rare. Difficult. Used only by artisans with specialized training. Meaning our killer can sew? Meaning our killer is precise. A tailor of death. I whistled. Cheerful. Wolfe's eyes slanted toward me. Your flippancy is unbecoming. That's what keeps me young. It will keep you dead should you continue exerting yourself while injured. He hadn't forgotten. I should have known. I leaned back, easing my side. Someone needed to visit Maison Valette. It should not have been you. Who else? Fritz? Theodore? You? Phooey. I rest my case. He glared, but underneath it was a warmth he rarely allowed. That was Wolfe's way. He wouldn't say he cared. He'd simply criticize any behavior that might jeopardize me. At 4:02 p.m., the phone rang. Its timing was too crisp to be accidental. I answered. Brownstone, Goodwin. Put Wolfe on, Kramer grunted. Hold. Wolfe extended a hand. I gave him the phone. Wolfe. A gruff exchange followed. I watched Wolfe's expression tighten, shift, then settle into a stillness that signaled new geometry forming in his head. I see, he said. When? Pause. And the time of death? Pause. No, that will not suffice. Give me precision. Another pause. Thank you. He hung up like he was sealing a verdict. Kramer's delightful as ever? I asked. He is agitated, Wolfe said. The autopsy confirms Claude Winfield died earlier than expected, several hours earlier. That's not great news. It is significant news. If Winfield died before your stabbing, then your assault was not part of a sequence. It was part of a deception. To frame me? To confuse the timeline, to misdirect the police. Well, I'm honored. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the office ceiling. Thunder rolled so loud the street outside vibrated. The storm had officially arrived. Wolfe stared at the swatches, his voice low. This killer is methodical. He leaves symbols, manipulates chronology, and selects victims with artisan precision. Nice resume, I said. Let's not let him apply again. We will not, Wolfe said. At 4:18 p.m., Fritz appeared in the doorway for dinner's early warning. His voice was gentle, respectful. Mr. Wolfe, the broth is ready. Wolfe nodded. Ritual dictated he follow at his own pace, which he did, rising like a mountain accepting its daily appointment. I gathered the evidence, tucked the swatches into their envelopes, and slipped the review drafts into a binder. When Wolfe reached the door, I called after him. Hey, boss. He glanced back. If the killer's a tailor, I said, I'd say he's got lousy taste. Archie, Wolfe said gravely, your levity is wasted on homicide. Not on me. He gave a tiny grunt, half concession, half fond annoyance, and went to dinner. The storm outside intensified, rain streaking the windows in shimmering washes, thunder marking the tempo. Inside, the brownstone settled into that unmistakable atmosphere. Wolfe thinking, Fritz cooking, me preparing for trouble. And trouble, as always, was preparing for us. The first thing you learn in detective work, assuming you survive long enough to learn anything, is that hunches are like subway rats. They show up uninvited, chew on your nerves, and disappear when you most want to kick them. The hunch that dragged me back to Maison Valette late that night was one of the twitchy kind, the sort that won't leave you alone, no matter how politely you tell it there's bourbon at home. The city was transitioning from respectable twilight to questionable evening when I got there. Fifth Avenue had thinned out, a few taxis cruising past like lazy sharks. The atelier windows glowed faintly, but the rest of the building was dark, the kind of dark that suggested either economy or guilt. My side ached as I used Regina's key, but I ignored the pain. It had been complaining all day and could take a number like everyone else. Inside, the place felt wrong. Not quiet. Quiet can be peaceful. This was silence with a pulse. The sewing machines sat abandoned, their needles still, like the aftermath of an interrupted ritual. Shadows stretched long and dramatic across the floor, cast by the streetlights outside. Steam no longer curled from the irons. Instead, cold air drifted in from a half-open window at the back. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't been careful. "Anyone home?" I called. No answer. If this were a stage drama, that line would have cued the killer to leap out with fanfare. Instead, the only response was the faint hum of Manhattan nightlife creeping in through the window. I moved deeper into the atelier. My hunch gnawed harder. Something was off in the air, something metallic and faintly sweet. Experience told me what it meant even before my mind caught up. Murder has a smell all its own. I rounded the end of a cutting table and froze. Eloise Trent lay stretched across it like an advertisement for tragedy. Someone had posed her deliberately, arms arranged gracefully, legs slightly angled, head turned just so, as if she were modelling the Afterlife spring collection. Only the gash across her throat ruined the artistry. A fabric cutter, still slick, lay on the table beside her. Whoever did it had precision, too much precision. Around her shoulders, draped like a mock stole, was that same pale blue fabric, Maison Valette's signature weave. It gleamed faintly under the overhead light, soft and cruel at the same time. I prefer women upright, breathing, and not accessorized with homicide, I muttered. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need Wolfe to tell me evidence shouldn't be fingerprinted by enthusiastic assistants. Instead, I pulled out the police band radio Kramer had bullied me into carrying years ago and called it in. "Goodwin," came Kramer's voice, sharper than usual. "Where the hell are you?" "Maison Valette," I said. "Bring a squad and Stebbins, and maybe a priest." "What happened?" "I found Eloise Trent," I said. "She's posing for the wrong type of layout." He didn't waste breath on profanity. "We're on our way." I clicked off and stayed where I was. The shadows felt like they were inching closer. The pale blue cloth trembled slightly in a draught. Eloise's face, made up, elegant and drained of everything human, seemed to accuse me personally. I looked away, just in time to hear footsteps echo behind me. I turned. Mason Clark stepped into the room. Too soon. Way too soon. He blinked at me, then at Eloise, and froze, not the freeze of shock, but the freeze of a man arranging his expression quickly. "Good God," he whispered. "Regina sent me. She said you might come back." "That's so?" I asked. "Yes. She was afraid you'd get hurt again." Funny how he said it without any real warmth. "You got here fast," I said casually. He swallowed. "I was nearby. I came as soon as I could." "Of course you did." I watched him carefully. His gaze flicked to the cloth draped around Eloise's shoulders, then away with deliberate control. Too deliberate. The man had more poise than I liked. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. "It's dangerous." "I've noticed," I said, "twice today." He flinched, just a tiny twitch, but I caught it. We stood there in the low, moody lighting like two actors who'd wandered on stage without rehearsing our lines. Sirens wailed in the distance. Good. Reinforcements. And witnesses. Mason rubbed his hands together. "You don't think, this is terrible, but Eloise, she had enemies. She owed money, gambling debts. She had a lover she kept hidden. You should look into that." "A helpful suggestion," I said. "Suspiciously helpful." He stiffened. "I'm only trying to cooperate. I'll note that." Through the front window, red and blue lights bloomed across the street like violent flowers. Seconds later, Kramer strode in with the subtlety of a fire alarm, Stebbins at his heels. Kramer took one look at Eloise and exhaled a heavy human sigh. "Damn it." "Professional day for murderers," I said. He shot me a look, not angry, tired. "Did you touch anything?" "Nope. Learned my lesson, remember?" He grunted. "Good. Stebbins, photographs. Bag the cutter." Pearlie nodded and got to work. Kramer came toward me, arms folded, cigar unlit between his teeth. His voice dropped. "Goodwin, I don't say this often, but good job. You didn't disturb the scene. If I hadn't been so tired, I might have fainted. I'll embroider that on a pillow." "Do that," he said. "But don't get cocky." "I'll stitch that too." His eyes narrowed at the pale blue fabric. "Same as the other swatch?" "Yes," I said. "Same weave, same thread. Someone's matching victims to wardrobe." "Gives us a pattern," Kramer muttered. "I hate patterns." Pearlie looked up. "Lieutenant, you want the model's purse?" "Bring it." I watched Mason hover like a man trying to appear useful without actually being useful. Kramer turned to him. "You, Clark, why are you here?" "Regina sent me," Mason said quickly. "She thought Mr. Goodwin might come back. I came to check on him." Kramer eyed him. "You showed up awful fast." I was nearby. You always nearby murder scenes, Clark? Mason swallowed. No. Kramer's stare lingered long enough to make paint peel. Then he turned back to Eloise. We'll take her to the morgue. I stayed silent. There wasn't much else to say. After an hour of statements, measurements, photographs, and more, Stebbins grunting than I care to remember, Kramer finally told me to beat it before I got stabbed again. Goodwin, he said as I turned to leave, don't come back here alone. Next time, bring backup. Haven't you heard? I said. I'm immortal. Kramer snorted. Sure, until you're not. I left Mason in the police spotlight, answering questions with all the smoothness of a salesman who'd practiced lying in a mirror. Outside, the night wind hit me like a reprimand. I caught a cab and let it rattle me back to the brownstone, where normal people enjoyed bedtime instead of corpses. Inside, the hallway lamp was on. Wolfe's subtle admission he'd been waiting. I stepped into the office. Wolfe looked up from his book with an expression that combined relief, outrage, and the faintest trace of affection buried under layers of vocabulary. You are intact, he said. Mostly. You are a confounded, reckless... Mother Wolfe, I said sweetly. That earned a genuine pfui. I dropped into my chair, exhausted, bruised, and carrying the image of Eloise Trent posed in death like a runway goddess gone wrong. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, Wolfe's eyes sharpened with new calculation, and I knew the case had taken its nastiest turn yet. I've seen the brownstone host some uncomfortable gatherings, but that particular afternoon it had the atmospheric charm of a courtroom where all the defendants already suspected the gallows carpenter was measuring neck sizes. By 4:15, Wolfe had declared Orchid Hours officially suspended, an event that should have earned a parade, and had arranged the chairs in his office with the precision of a general positioning artillery. I knew then we were in for a lively session. The principals arrived in stages, each carrying enough tension to rewire Manhattan's grid. Regina stepped in first, shoulders tight, gloves clutched like she was strangling an invisible serpent. Lydia followed, sleek as a blade and twice as comforting. Mason Clark came after her with that polished, I'm innocent even if I'm not smile. And Paul Anders brought up the rear, looking like a rabbit who'd just been informed dinner was pot roast. Wolfe didn't rise or offer comfort. He simply inclined his head. Please be seated. His tone made it clear that reclining on train tracks would be more pleasant. The office lamp cast long amber shadows that made each of them look slightly distorted, an optical illusion that felt appropriate. Kucha, after all, is built on illusion. Rivalry, vanity, wounds hiding under silk. The motif hung thick in the air. I took my usual position at my desk, pretending to look busy arranging note cards, while actually watching their micro-expressions with the interest of a man who has been stabbed once already and has no intention of auditioning for a matching set. Wolfe began with the delicacy of a man slicing fruit with a machete. Mrs. Valette, he said, your couture house appears to be the centre of sabotage, blackmail, and now murder. You have, I trust, prepared full candour. Regina wet her lips. I'll do my best, Mr. Wolfe. That, Wolfe replied, is insufficient. I require the truth, not performance. Lydia snorted softly. Mason shot her a warning look. Paul swallowed audibly. Wolfe shifted his gaze. Miss Lydia Valette, your presence is mandatory, but your cooperation is optional. However, I advise the former. She lifted her chin. I have nothing to hide. A declaration heard often by guilty parties, Wolfe murmured. That rankled her. I came because my sister insisted, not because I owe explanations to anyone in this room. You owe them to Miss Trent, Wolfe said. She cannot speak for herself. Regina flinched. Mason's jaw rippled. Paul went pale. Wolfe let the silence linger long enough to make them uncomfortable, then flicked his fingers. Archie? Yes, sir? Pour beer. This was punishment disguised as honour. I knew the routine. Beer service meant Wolfe thought I'd been too flippant, or he simply wanted to occupy me so I wouldn't needle him during cross-examination. I rose, limped minimally for dramatic effect, and fetched a chilled glass from the small side table Fritz had prepared. Wolfe accepted it without thanks. Regina's eyes widened as if witnessing a sacrament. Wolfe took a sip. We begin. He lifted a sheet of paper, the lab analysis Kramer had sent hours earlier. Eloise Trent's manicure, he said, contained traces of gold thread. Regina gasped. Lydia stiffened. Mason blinked rapidly. Paul looked confused, which for him was business as usual. Gold thread is used, Wolfe continued, only for private commissions, garments exclusive to high-paying clients, clients of great wealth. Therefore, Miss Trent was connected to someone of means. Mason spoke quickly. That doesn't prove anything. Gold thread could have... Mr. Clark, Wolfe cut in, you will not interrupt. I'm only saying, you will not interrupt. Mason shut his mouth. Lydia smirked. I tapped my pencil against the desk in a slow rhythm, partly to annoy Wolfe, partly because the tension needed percussion. He lasted 4 taps before glaring at me with enough heat to melt my shoelaces. Goodwin. Yes? Cease that infernal beating. Certainly. I put the pencil down, then picked it up again, then put it down harder. He closed his eyes briefly, the Wolfe equivalent of profanity, back to the suspects. Miss Trent, Wolfe resumed, was involved in more than modelling. She dealt in gossip. She supplied Claude Winfield with confidential intelligence about couture houses. This, Mrs. Valette, you neglected to mention. Regina swallowed. I didn't know the extent. You knew enough, Wolfe said mildly. Your finances demonstrate desperation. Her debts demonstrate risk. His reviews demonstrate opportunity. Mason's voice rose. Are you accusing Regina? I am stating facts, Wolfe said serenely. Accusation requires conclusion. Lydia leaned back, crossing her legs with deliberate poise. She hides everything. She always has. You are hardly transparent yourself, Regina snapped. Oh, please. You destroyed my designs long before I left the firm. You left because you refused to follow the brand vision. The brand vision is dead, Wolfe slapped a palm against the desk, not loudly, but with enough authority to end all sibling warfare in a 10-mile radius. You will remain silent, he commanded, until I finish. They froze. Paul trembled so hard I contemplated offering him a sedative. Wolfe continued. Eloise Trent, however compromised, did not slit her own throat. Someone staged her on that cutting table, draping her in pale blue fabric she never would have touched voluntarily. Someone inflicted precision. Meaning one of us? Lydia asked coldly. Meaning someone with access, Wolfe said. Access to the atelier, to Miss Trent, to private commissions. Paul croaked. I only handle patterns. Precisely, Wolfe said. You handle patterns, not commissions. Paul sagged in relief. Too much relief. Lydia noticed. So did I. Wolfe lifted another paper. Mr. Panzer has returned with information. Claude Winfield was blackmailing someone at Maison Valette. Regina went chalk white. Lydia straightened. Mason froze. Paul stared at his shoes. What kind of blackmail? Regina whispered. A forged lineage, Wolfe said. Your company has long marketed a false ancestral origin, a fictional couturier from 19th century France. Winfield discovered documentation that contradicted this story. Someone paid him to keep quiet. Mason finally cracked. That doesn't mean... Wolfe raised an eyebrow. It means motive, Mr. Clark. Motive layered with financial deceit. Lydia muttered. I knew it. The investors were too eager, too gullible. Regina hissed. Stop it. No, Lydia said. Let him say it. Which one of you paid Winfield to keep quiet? No one, Regina said. Liar. You shut your mouth. Ladies, I said helpfully, before someone starts throwing buttons. Archie, Wolfe barked. I shut up. The phone rang at 5:03 p.m. I reached it before Wolfe could object. Goodwin. Put Wolfe on, Kramer said. One moment. Wolfe took the phone, nostrils flaring like a bull preparing to critique a matador. Yes, Mr. Kramer? A pause, then another. Wolfe's expression tightened. I am aware, Wolfe said. The press often indulge in folly. Another pause. I assure you I am interfering with nothing. Pause. Very well. Thank you. He hung up with a curt motion. Regina asked, The police? The newspapers, Wolfe said. They insinuate that I am obstructing the investigation. Public opinion is turning. Mason exhaled. This is catastrophic. It is inconvenient, Wolfe corrected, but not insurmountable. I will conclude this matter before the press attempts crucifixion. Lydia asked, Conclude? Today? No. Wolfe folded his hands. But soon. Paul whimpered. Wolfe's eyes swept them like a searchlight. I know now the killer's temperament, his methods, his skill. He tapped the documents. This is a craftsman, a schemer, someone who cuts on the bias, literally and figuratively, someone accustomed to trimming excess, fabric or human. Regina shuddered. Mason stared at Wolfe, panic flickering behind his eyes. Lydia's gaze sharpened. Paul trembled visibly. Wolfe leaned back, monumental. You may go, but do not leave Manhattan. They rose one by one, each carrying guilt like a handbag. Fritz appeared silently at the doorway, a sign that dinner was ready. Wolfe lifted his chin. Archie, escort them out. Sure, I said. Anyone fainting on the stairs pays extra. Lydia glared. Mason muttered something. Regina whispered a thank you. Paul nearly tripped over his own shadow. When the door closed and the brownstone regained its sacred quiet, Wolfe sighed. A tailor of death, he repeated. I grinned. Well, I guess we'd better hem him in, he groaned. Archie, pfui. If there's a stairway in Manhattan that isn't trying to kill you, I haven't met it. The one leading up to Mrs. Odelia Marks's walk-up was doing its level best to finish what my stabber started. By the third flight, my side was throbbing like a nightclub drum solo. By the fourth, I was reconsidering every major life decision, including ever leaving Ohio. Saul Panzer, of course, glided upward like his shoes were fitted with helium. You're slowing down, Archie, he murmured as we hit the fifth landing. I'm savouring the architecture, I panted. It's a little-known hobby of mine. Stair appreciation, very chic. Saul gave one of his minimal smiles, the kind that meant he knew I was suffering but respected my dignity enough not to say so. He knocked once on the chipped door marked 5C. From inside came a shuffling sound, then a chain sliding back. The door opened a cautious 3 inches, revealing an eye as sharp as a sewing needle. Yes? The woman asked. Mrs. Marks, Saul said gently. My name is Panzer. This is Goodwin. We were hoping to ask a few questions about your time at Maison Valette. The door opened the rest of the way. Mrs. Odelia Marks, 70 if she was a day, wrapped in a faded wool shawl, gave us each a long look. Her apartment smelled of tea, mothballs, and the faint, ghostly trace of expensive fabric long vanished from her life. You're the one who got stabbed, she said to me matter-of-factly. Only a little, I said. I'm very stab-resistant. Get in. Don't drip on the rug. We stepped inside. The living room was a museum of her career. Sketches pinned to the wall, bolts of old material neatly shelved, a sewing machine that looked older than Prohibition but well oiled. A kettle whistled softly on the tiny stove. Sit, she ordered, pointing to 2 mismatched chairs. Don't break them, they're antique. Saul sat primly. I sat slowly. She lowered herself into her own chair and folded her hands. I don't talk much about the Valette years. Too much ambition, too much fighting, not enough decency. That about sums up Fifth Avenue, I said. She ignored me completely. What do you want? Saul leaned forward. We're investigating the deaths of Claude Winfield and Eloise Trent. Mrs. Marks closed her eyes briefly. Terrible business. Terrible, but not surprising. Why not? I asked. Because that house was built on stolen thread, she said. You don't make a beautiful coat out of rotten fabric. I traded a look with Saul. This was promising. Mrs. Marks continued. The Valette sisters, Regina and Lydia, were brilliant, both of them. But brilliance can twist into rivalry if you're not careful. And they weren't careful. She took a sip of tea. Years ago, before they were famous, Lydia designed a collection meant to launch them. Original pieces. Stunning work. She poured her soul into it. Regina took it. She stole the designs, I asked. Stole them, claimed them, defended them. Lydia threatened to expose everything. Regina threatened to cut her out of the business. The investors were told a tidy lie and went on believing it. The real work, the genius, it came from Lydia's hands. Saul asked, why didn't Lydia fight harder? Mrs. Marks shrugged. Because they needed the money. Because Regina was the face, the socialite, the charm. Lydia was the craft. One without the other couldn't sell a handkerchief, so the lie stayed. She stared hard at me. You men think fashion is just fabric. It isn't. It's reputation, identity. Theft of credit is worse than theft of gold. I nodded. I've known a few crooks who'd agree with you. She gave a dry laugh. Then her expression sharpened. You brought a swatch with you, didn't you? Saul produced the envelope. Yes. She held out a hand. Give it. We handed it over. She pulled out the pale blue scrap, turned it under the lamp, and made a sound halfway between a sigh and a curse. This thread, she said, this diagonal weave, I know it. I leaned forward. Where from? It's Lydia's, she said, her private line. She used this weave once years ago in secret commissions, clients who wanted something unique. Regina hated it because it cost too much. Saul asked, You're certain? She gave him the look of a woman who had corrected professionals for 40 years. There is no mistaking this thread. I created half its prototypes myself. That hit like a cold wind. She continued, Whoever stabbed you, Mr. Goodwin, brushed against something in Lydia's workroom. That scrap didn't come from Regina. It came from Lydia. I kept my voice level. Could Lydia be the murderer? Mrs. Marks sniffed. She's fierce, she's resentful. She's capable of slashing reputations. But murder? She hesitated. I never saw it in her eyes, but resentment makes people strange. Did Eloise Trent ever work with Lydia? Saul asked. Not directly, but Eloise knew everything. She had ears like a bat and the morals of a pickpocket. She blackmailed people too. Oh yes, don't let her cheekbones fool you. I made a note, then paused. What about Claude Winfield? Mrs. Marks gave a wicked smile. That man couldn't keep a secret if you embroidered it on his pillow. He loved scandal, he loved power, and he loved being paid for silence. If he discovered the truth about the sisters, he would have demanded gold. Gold thread, private commissions, Lydia's secret line. Things were sewing themselves together, and not in a comforting way. Mrs. Marks sat back. There's your scandal. There's your motive. If someone wanted those old sins buried, or wanted to ruin the sisters entirely, they'd start with fabric. Saul asked, Is there anyone else who knew the truth? One, she said. A cutter named Margot Baines. Dead now, car accident. Convenient timing. Saul and I exchanged a look. That went on the list. Mrs. Marks exhaled as if unburdened. I've told you enough. Leave an old woman to her tea. We rose. I winced slightly, which she noticed. You shouldn't be running around with a wound, she said. Men are fools. Only the handsome ones, I replied. She said. You overestimate yourself. I opened the door. Thanks anyway. She waved us off. The stairwell was no friendlier going down, but gravity did half the work. Outside, dusk had settled, and the street smelled of rain and distant bakery ovens. Saul flagged a cab. Well? He asked quietly. Well, I said, we just found a seamstress who knows more truth than the valets have admitted in 15 years. And the diagonal thread? Points to Lydia, I said, straight as a tailor's chalk line. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, pretending not to listen for the sound of my footsteps. I walked in, dropped the folder on his desk, and eased myself into my chair. He grunted. You are late. You're welcome, I said. Report. I relayed Mrs. Marks's revelations while Wolfe listened with narrowing eyes. When I reached the part about the stolen designs, he let out a heavy breath. Vanity, he muttered. Human vanity ruins more fabric than moths. Add murderers with scissors to the list, I said. You, he snapped, will rest your wound. I'm springy as fresh elastic. Archie. Yes? Silence. I saluted with 2 fingers. Yes, Mother Wolfe. He growled a quiet phooey and reached for the bell cord. The first sign the day was going to misbehave was the mannequin staring at me, with one arm missing and the other raised like it was about to file a complaint with management. Maison Valet's rehearsal room always had a dramatic streak, but that morning it felt as if the props themselves were tired of lying for people. The models swanned around in silk and satin, the seamstresses whispered over steaming irons, and someone had decided that faint jazz drifting from a phonograph was enough to keep everything civilized. It wasn't. I moved through the chaos with the grace of a man whose side still remembered being stabbed. Lydia Valette spotted me from across the room and made a face that suggested I was either a stain on her fabric or a smudge on her conscience. You again, she said, striding toward me like a panther in couture. Me again, I agreed. I'm thinking of paying rent here." "You'd overpay for the privilege," she snapped, then turned away toward a model complaining about hem length. Lydia's charm was the kind that needed to be stored in a freezer, or it spoiled. My attention returned to the broken mannequin, the same one I'd seen during my last unwelcome visit. Its right arm had been snapped clean at the socket, a break too fresh to be coincidence. I crouched down, ignoring the protest from my rib, and examined the socket. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal, tiny, wedged into the splintered wood. I fished out my penknife carefully and teased the sliver free. It was a fragment of a blade, thin, sharp, unmistakable, the kind you'd find in a fabric cutter, the kind that had opened my side like a poorly stitched seam. "Well," I murmured, "isn't that cozy?" "Goodwin?" I looked up. Paul Anders hovered nearby, wringing his hands like he was auditioning for a role as human anxiety. "You shouldn't touch things," he squeaked. "I touched it," I said, "and the world didn't explode." Paul flushed. "I mean, Kramer, evidence." "Relax, I'm not eating it." I pocketed the sliver carefully. "When did this mannequin break?" "Last night," he stammered. "During fittings, Lydia said it fell." "Did it?" Paul's eyes darted around. I don't know." Lydia was watching us now. Her stare could have sliced through burlap. I moved away from Paul before Lydia could accuse me of contaminating her artistic aura. But Paul followed. Either he wanted to confess something or he wanted someone near him when Lydia exploded. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. "Mr. Goodwin," he whispered, "I saw something." "Congratulations," I said. "That puts you ahead of most people in this room." He shook so hard his glasses nearly fell off. "No, I mean, I saw Claude Winfield." "When?" "2 nights ago." His voice dropped. "He was meeting with Mr. Clark." That one hit harder than a steam iron. "Mason Clark?" Paul nodded frantically. "Yes, in the back office. They were talking about money, not normal money." He swallowed. "Fraud." I raised a brow. "Investment fraud?" "Yes, they sounded scared or angry. I don't know. I left before they saw me." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" His voice cracked. "Because people who know things here end up dead." A fair point. Before I could press him further, Mason Clark himself appeared like he'd been summoned by guilt. He walked toward us with that corporate smile of his, smooth, composed, about as genuine as a $3 diamond. "Goodwin," he said, nodding. "Checking on our progress again?" "I like to supervise," I said. "Keeps me youthful." He gave a tight chuckle, but his eyes flickered to Paul, who was melting into a puddle of nerves. "Everything all right, Anders?" Paul managed. Fine, just fine." Mason's gaze slid back to me. "You know, Goodwin, rumors travel fast in a place like this. It would help if you didn't spook my employees." "I don't need to spook them," I said. "This place scares itself." His smile wavered. "Is there something you want?" "Yes," I said. "Answers." Before he could reply, the front door opened and brought in a gust of cold air, a faint whiff of cigar smoke, and Lieutenant Kramer. He looked like a man who'd been forced to cut back on coffee and hated every minute of it. He walked in briskly, Stebbins at his heels, clipboard in hand. No shouting, no barging, just a measured professional entrance that said he meant business. "Goodwin," he said with a curt nod. "Lieutenant," I returned. "Fancy seeing you in a house of high fashion." "I've been in worse places," he grunted. "Morgues, for instance." Stebbins snorted. Kramer surveyed the room. "Wolfe sent word, something about a fabric clue." "Well," I said, "miracles happen." "Don't start." He pointed at the mannequin. "Show me." I walked him over and revealed the broken socket. "Found this lodged in it." I handed him the metal fragment with care worthy of a peace treaty. Kramer studied it, jaw tightening. "Same type used on you?" "Seems that way." Stebbins took the fragment, bagging it. "Too clean to tell much," he said. Kramer turned to Lydia. "Miss Valette, any reason your mannequin is shedding lethal hardware?" She bristled. "I already told everyone. It fell." "Convenient fool," Kramer said mildly. "Right around the time Goodwin here got sliced." Lydia folded her arms. "Are you implying something?" "I don't imply," Kramer said. "I investigate." That was his version of charm. Then, unexpectedly, he added, "Wolfe was right about the fabric. The lab matched both swatches." I blinked. "Did you just credit Wolfe?" He looked like he regretted it instantly. "Don't get used to it." Stebbins smirked behind him. Kramer turned back to Mason. "I want a statement from you. Now." Mason stiffened. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds this is a murder investigation." Kramer's tone didn't raise, but the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. "You were close to Eloise. You were close to Valette Finances. You were close to Winfield. Too close." Mason exhaled through his nose. "Fine." Paul tugged my sleeve. When I leaned down, he whispered, "He looked angry when Winfield left that night. Really angry." "Helpful," I murmured. "Possibly deadly." Kramer barked at Stebbins to escort Mason to the back office. When they were gone, he turned to me. "You get anything else?" "Only that this place has enough secrets to fill Madison Square Garden." "If these people stitch truth as well as lies," Kramer said, "they'd make fortunes." I nearly applauded. "Good line, Lieutenant." "Shut up." But he didn't mean it. Not fully. As the models resumed rehearsal and the jazz crooned in the background, I took statements, snagged timelines, and noted reactions. Mason returned eventually, sweating under the cool air like a man in a sauna. Regina looked shaken. Lydia looked furious. Paul looked like he'd faint if someone sneezed too loudly. Everything pointed to Mason, too neatly, like a garment pinned to hide its flaws, and that bothered me. Kramer finished packing up. "Give Wolfe my regards," he said grudgingly. "Will do." "And Goodwin?" "Yeah?" "Don't die yet. I need you alive to testify when this circus collapses." "Touching," I said. "I'll postpone my funeral." Kramer and Stebbins left, taking half the room's oxygen with them. I stood alone among mannequins, models, and lies dressed in silk. The metal fragment in Kramer's evidence bag glinted like a wink. But something still felt wrong. Too staged, too pointed, too convenient. As the jazz hummed on, I thought, someone here was playing a deeper game, and we were all dancing to their tune. There are days when working for Nero Wolfe feels like being valet to a dormant volcano, quiet enough to lull you, but with a magma core that can blow the roof off Manhattan when he finally decides to erupt. That afternoon, the brownstone vibrated with one of those long silences that meant Wolfe was deep inside the contours of the problem, threading the pieces together with all the grace of a tyrant tailor stitching his own universe. He had exiled himself to the office since 3 o'clock, forbidding interruptions unless the house caught fire. Kramer confessed to a misdemeanor, or Fritz declared a strike. I was posted in the front room acting as secretary, gatekeeper, and occasional hostage. Saul had come and gone with a nod. The orchids upstairs exhaled their perfumed superiority through the vents, and Manhattan's winter twilight pressed at the windows like a nosy neighbor trying to peek in at the drama. Lon Cohen called at 4:12 with his newsroom buzzing. "Archie, the Gazette's going wild," he said. "Some papers are spinning this as a fashion house feud. One rag claims Wolfe is sabotaging the investigation to protect a friend at City Hall." "That would be quite a trick," I said. "He wouldn't know a City Hall official if one crawled up his chrysanthemum bed." Lon snorted. "Wolfe needs to get ahead of this. Got anything to feed me?" "Nothing that won't get me arrested." "Good enough. Call if Wolfe coughs." When I hung up, my stomach reminded me I'd skipped lunch. Normally, skipping lunch around Nero Wolfe is a felony, but given the circumstances, Fritz had excused himself to monitor the kitchen with the gloom of a man who believes homicide investigations are hazardous to soup consistency. I headed to the kitchen for a drink and made the mistake of selecting milk, my second permissible mention for the case. Fritz observed me with the reproachful gaze of a man who regarded milk as a substance meant only for infants and recipes. "You should eat," he said. "I will once Wolfe remembers food exists." "He always remembers," Fritz said darkly, "sometimes too late." I took my milk and wandered back to the office door. It was shut, of course, and I wasn't suicidal enough to open it. Instead, I jotted notes, sorted the fabric swatches, and tried not to think about the sliver of blade Kramer had pocketed earlier. At 5:56 p.m., precisely 4 minutes before dinner, the doorknob turned. Wolfe emerged. Calling him focused doesn't begin to cover it. He had the expression of a man who'd just finished auditing the universe and found several discrepancies. "Archie," he said. "Yes?" "Summon Mr. Kramer. Now." "That good, huh?" "I will not characterize it. Call him." I did, and Kramer responded with a tone that was half groan, half resignation. "I'm coming," he said. "Tell Wolfe if he's wrong this time, I'm throwing him in the Hudson." I relayed the message. Wolfe said, "Pfui," which in his dialect meant Kramer had struck a nerve. We sat down to dinner while waiting, because it was 8 o'clock and Wolfe would sooner commit arson than miss it. Fritz presented trout with lemon butter, roasted potatoes, and a salad so crisp it could have been used as insulation. Wolfe ate with mechanical deliberation. I picked at my food between surges of anticipation. At 8:43, the bell rang. I went to the front. Kramer stood there, fedora low, cigar unlit, impatience radiating from him like steam off a manhole. "Where is he?" he grumbled. "In the office," I said. "Try not to bite him." "No promises." We went in. Wolfe was seated behind his desk, domed head shining under the lamp, fingers steepled. He didn't rise, of course. Respect existed in Wolfe's world, but never vertically. "Good evening, Mr. Kramer," he said. "Cut the courtesies. What have you got?" Wolfe inhaled slowly, savouring the moment. He always did enjoy an audience, especially one that made interesting noises under pressure. "I have the truth," he said. "Sit." Kramer sat. He didn't look happy about it. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, the swatches." I handed over the threatening fabric messages, careful not to ripple them. Wolfe arranged them in a line like tarot cards for the terminally fashionable. "The coded stitches," he began, "were the key. A tailor familiar only with diagonal threading could have done this. Lydia Valette's private commissions use such technique. The killer wanted her blamed." Kramer grunted. "We figured that." Indeed. Except Lydia lacked two crucial skills: the advanced numeric coding involved and the capacity for calculated misdirection. She is temperamental, not meticulous. Wolfe lifted one swatch. This code required someone who understood financial records more intimately than fabric, someone who spent years manipulating ledgers, not hems. I saw where he was going. Kramer saw it too, his jaw set like concrete. "Mason Clark," he said. Wolfe nodded once. "He embezzled from Maison Valette. He falsified investor reports. To attract wealth, he perpetuated the myth of a forged couture lineage. When Claude Winfield discovered it, Clark paid him for silence. But Winfield had no loyalty. He squeezed Clark until Clark planned murder." Kramer didn't interrupt. When Wolfe actually solved something before midnight, even Kramer respected the moment. "Eloise Trent," Wolfe continued, "knew too much. She fed gossip to Winfield. When she learned he was blackmailing Clark, she tried to leverage the situation. Clark killed her as well." "And Archie?" Kramer asked. Wolfe's voice hardened. "A blunder. Clark expected Winfield to meet a courier that dawn. He mistook Archie for him. Goodwin carries himself with such efficiency that Clark assumed he was bearing evidence." "That," I said, "is the nicest thing anyone said about me today." Wolfe ignored me. "The mannequin fragment planted the next night was meant to reinforce suspicion on Lydia." Kramer rubbed his forehead. "I'll need proof, Wolfe, not just a lecture." "There is proof," Wolfe said calmly. "Archie?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small notepad with the address stenographer's handwriting, and handed Wolfe the page I'd clipped earlier. "This," Wolfe said, offering it across the desk, "is the telephone log from Mason Clark's office. It records a call at 4:48 a.m. the morning Archie was stabbed, from a payphone on Madison Avenue near the very spot." Kramer blinked. "You got this how?" I shrugged. "People talk to me. I have a trustworthy face." "That's debatable," Kramer muttered. Wolfe went on. "Clark used the call to lure Winfield, or so he believed, to the location. Instead, Archie blundered into it." "I prefer strode confidently," I said. "You blundered," Wolfe said curtly. Kramer examined the log. "This ties him to the scene. Titan's motive. And with the financial records," he sighed. "Damn it, Wolfe, you might actually have solved this." Wolfe's eyebrows rose. "Surely you do not sound surprised." Kramer scowled. "Let's just say it's been a long week." He stood. "All right. I'll pick up Clark tonight. The DA can handle the rest." "Bring him here," Wolfe said. "I prefer to conclude matters in my own office." Kramer grunted but didn't argue. Wolfe inclined his head. "You have my report. And my assurance." "Yeah, well," Kramer added gruffly, "thanks." Then, under his breath, Don't make me say that again. He stomped out. Stebbins met him at the front door, trailing behind like a loyal bulldog. The two disappeared into the cold Manhattan night. Back in the office, Wolfe exhaled as though releasing 20 pounds from his conscience. I settled into my chair, stretching my side carefully. "You did well," Wolfe said abruptly. It startled me. Compliments from Wolfe were rarer than polite cab drivers. "You mean with the phone log?" I asked. "That, and your endurance." He eyed my side pointedly, despite persistent foolishness. "Well," I said, "I had help from the milk." "That substance," Wolfe said with profound disdain, "should be reserved for children and invalids." "You're welcome." He glared, which from Wolfe meant affection. The brownstone settled into its familiar warmth, lamps glowing, orchids perfuming the air, Fritz clattering faintly in the kitchen as he scolded a pot for being insufficiently Swiss. Outside, Manhattan hummed its eternal nocturne. Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again. "Archie." "Yes?" "Bring beer." I rose, grinning. "With pleasure." As I poured the chilled glass, his ritual victory trophy, Wolfe adjusted himself in his chair, the great brain finally at rest. The killer was named, the threads were tied, and in that old brownstone, harmony quilted itself back together. There are days when Wolfe's office feels like a comfortable cave, and others when it feels like a courtroom built by a tyrant with a fondness for ritual and mahogany. That evening, it was the latter. Wolfe had orchestrated the seating arrangement with the precision of a master tailor pinning patterns. Regina in the red chair near the window, Lydia cool and coiled beside her, Paul hunched on the edge of the settee, Mason Clark dead center in the leather chair directly across from Wolfe, and Kramer and Stebbins standing guard near the door like mismatched bookends carved from irritation and bulldog grit. The orchids behind Wolfe's desk perfumed the air with a faint, ironic sweetness, like flowers placed in a room about to witness an execution. Social, not literal, though Mason's pulse suggested he wasn't entirely sure. I stayed by my desk. My side still twinged, but after being stabbed once, sitting through a showdown felt like a spa treatment by comparison. Wolfe began with no preamble, throat-clearing, or polite acknowledgements. When he wanted to dominate a room, he simply existed in it. "You all are here," he said, "because the pattern is complete." Regina trembled. Lydia narrowed her eyes. Mason looked insulted at the implication he might not be in control. Paul looked like he wanted to faint but couldn't afford the medical bill. Kramer folded his arms. "All right, Wolfe, let's hear the tapestry." Wolfe's lips twitched. "Mr. Goodwin, the swatches." I handed over the threatening fabric pieces, each embroidered with stitched warnings. Wolfe arranged them in a line between him and Mason, like an indictment written in thread. "These," Wolfe said, "form the spine of the case. A killer who wished to implicate Lydia Valette used her private diagonal thread and her exclusive fabric line. Too obvious. Far too obvious." Lydia let out a sharp breath. "I told you." "Silence," Wolfe said without looking at her. She obeyed, barely. Wolfe pointed to the coded stitching. "These messages contain numeric thread coding, techniques used by advanced tailors. Miss Valette did not do this work. She does not possess the technical skill." Lydia tilted her chin smugly. Regina shot her a warning look. "But," Wolfe continued, "someone else did. Someone who had access to the private sewing machine after hours." Regina gasped softly. Lydia stiffened. Wolfe turned his gaze on Mason Clark. "You." Mason blinked. "Excuse me." "You handled investor correspondence, appointments, shipments, and private client requests. You were the only employee with a key to the basement workroom, the only room where a second, unregistered couture machine sat." "That's ridiculous," Mason said quickly. "I had access for security reasons." "You had access," Wolfe repeated, "because you installed the machine to create garments used in your embezzlement scheme." Silence landed like a hammer. Regina's eyes widened. Paul whimpered. Lydia looked triumphant for a fraction of a second before remembering this wasn't victory, merely survival. Wolfe continued with measured precision. "You siphoned funds by producing counterfeit private garments with fabricated lineage, falsely attributed to Regina's fictional ancestor. Investors believed in the myth. You pocketed the profit." Mason's mouth twitched. "That's—" "No," Wolfe cut in sharply. Claude Winfield discovered your deception. He confronted you, and you, faced with ruin, began killing. Kramer stepped forward, jaw grim. Go on. Wolfe pointed at the swatches again. The threat letters stitched in diagonal thread were designed to implicate Lydia. The killer wanted suspicion to follow her like a train on a gown. Lydia flushed but stayed silent. Winfield, Wolfe said, became inconvenient. Eloise Trent, having observed too much and eager to leverage her information, became dangerous. And Mr. Goodwin, he turned his full attention to me, was the unintended target of the killer's first attack. Regina covered her mouth. Paul whimpered a second time. Lydia looked at me with an expression that might have passed for sympathy if you squinted. Kramer cleared his throat. Explain. Clark believed Winfield would be meeting a courier at dawn outside Madison Avenue, Wolfe said. Goodwin happened by coincidence. Clark saw a man walking briskly, carrying himself with a certain authority, and assumed he was the courier. Well, I said, I do project authority. You project recklessness, Wolfe said, but in this instance it served to confuse the killer. Mason leaned forward. This is absurd. You're fabricating. Enough. Wolfe's voice rolled across the room like a velvet boulder. Miss Trent's body was arranged in a tableau of couture, a mockery of fashion. The gold thread found in her manicure tied her to a private commission handled by you, Mr. Clark. Mason licked his lips. Coincidence. No, Wolfe said. In murder, coincidence is merely a poorly sewn seam. He shifted his focus to Paul, whose knees appeared to be auditioning for a jitterbug competition. Mr. Anders confessed he witnessed you secretly meeting with Winfield. Mason glared at Paul, who shriveled on the spot. Furthermore, Wolfe continued, the broken mannequin arm concealed the missing portion of the blade used to stab Archie. The killer broke the arm to hide evidence, but did so sloppily. Kramer nodded. My boys found the other piece. Wolfe tapped the swatches. Finally, the coded stitches themselves are financial shorthand. A tailor would not use them, but someone who lived in account books would. Mason's composure was cracking. You have no proof. Wolfe looked at me. Archie. I stood. Right. I produced the phone log page, the one we'd retrieved from the receptionist who adored me because I once fixed the office typewriter. This is a call placed at 4:48 a.m., the morning I got carved up. I handed it to Kramer, from a payphone half a block from where I was stabbed. Kramer studied it. Your office, Clark. Mason's face drained. You lured Winfield, Wolfe said softly, and stabbed the wrong man. Regina's hand trembled. Mason, no, you couldn't. It's a lie, Mason hissed. This is all manufactured. Valet politics, Lydia, Paul, anyone. You, Wolfe said, voice rising for the first time, stabbed Mr. Goodwin, believing him to be your messenger. Something broke in Mason's expression. He inhaled sharply, chest heaving. I didn't mean, he wasn't. He stopped, shut his eyes, opened them again, saw no help anywhere in the room, and sagged. Kramer stepped forward quietly, almost gently. You got him, Wolfe. No triumph, just weary acknowledgement. Mason slumped as Kramer cuffed him. Stebbins read him his rights with a solemnity unusual for the bulldog detective. The models, the glamour, the swatches, none of it mattered now. Murder wasn't stylish and guilt wasn't pretty. Regina sobbed into her gloves. Lydia sat still, rigid as a mannequin but breathing fast. When Mason was escorted out, Regina whispered, I never knew. I never imagined. Lydia, for once, didn't slice her with sarcasm. She looked at me instead. Goodwin. Her lips tightened. I apologize for thinking you'd done something foolish to provoke the attack. You weren't entirely wrong, I said, but apology accepted. Wolfe inhaled sharply. Archie, sentiment is unnecessary. Sure, I said. I'll send it back to the supplier. Lydia almost smiled. Almost. Kramer lingered in the doorway a moment. We'll finish the paperwork. You'll get your credit tomorrow. He paused. Try not to gloat, Wolfe. I never gloat, Wolfe said. Sure, Kramer muttered, and left. The brownstone quieted. Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, signaling that coffee would be available if Wolfe wished to perform the post-case ritual. Wolfe waved him off. He leaned back. Human vanity, he said slowly, destroys more lives than malice. I nodded. Vanity, greed, bad stitching, bad combination. Wolfe grunted. Archie? Yes? Sit. Be still. I sat. I was still. The case had snapped shut like a suitcase clasp. Next time someone wants to puncture me, I said, loosening my tie, I hope they send an appointment card. Wolfe snorted. Phooey. And that, as usual, meant we'd won.